There we go. When we got the papers to begin our mission, you know, to apply for our mission, I read them over 4 times because we had Bo, and I didn't know what we were going to do with Bo. I didn't want to leave her for a year and a half. I didn't want to ask anyone to take care of her, and I certainly couldn't give her away. So I read the papers 3 times through, the fine print, everything, and I saw no mention of pets. So when we talked about it, we decided we'd just take her. So she's probably one of the first and only dogs that have gone on a mission to Newfoundland. So anyway, we got the arrangements made to stay at Pasadena, and then we talked about the trip. And Gene mentioned that, as always, he would like to go not on the main drag, but on the byways. So we decided to go.
Grandfather was immigrated out of Scotland into Canada. And so we decided when we left here we were going to swing up into central Canada where Grandfather had his sawmills and things. And so we left here, went to Provo to go through the MTC, and I was just scared to death of that. And it was a hard time in a way to learn the things we had to do, but they did teach us a lot, and it was beneficial all the way through the mission.
One thing I remember about that vividly is that they put us through all sorts of types of teaching, like by written notes on the board, by verbal conversation, and then by role playing. So they had a session on role playing that they wanted us to learn that sometimes you can teach by role playing. And so, Gene, how did you feel about that?
That one was what was hard. What they did is set up a room, and they had somebody in the room. You'd go knock on the door, tell them who you are, why you were there, and what you wanted to talk to them about. Well, some of them were receptive, and some of them were positively negative. And so I'll just refer to one of the negative ones. There was a lady when we knocked on the door, and she came to the door and answered it. She wasn't going to let us in. But we visited with her at the door a few minutes, and she said, well, come on into the house and we'll talk about it. And boy, she run us through the ringer. She was negative on everything, and we didn't convert her, I'll tell you, but we did finally get, so we had a conversation with her, and she was civil with us then, but it was a really hard experience.
I thought you were going to say that one of the missionaries that were there said they thought she wasn't even a member,
Yeah.
but she was a member.
The couple that followed us to that door was an ex-bishop, and when we got back together to discuss what we had learned, he was all upset. He said that that woman needed to go to her bishop. She had a real problem. And so she was, I would say, as good or better actress than I've ever been involved with, because she convinced that bishop that she wasn't going to be active in the church. So it was an interesting thing to go through, and I think that experience helped me more because I then knew what we might be confronted with.
So after we were through with our MTC classes and all, we discussed what we had learned and all, and Gene said, I asked him which session he thought was most helpful, and as it turned out, he thought role-playing was the most informative and where he learned the most. So that was a good experience. So then we take off. We get to Canada, where Archibald had his sawmill, and there was a new building there, and it was a new business. What were they doing? They were doing pottery for yards. But we walked out to where the mill was, and the owner was very gracious and showed us all around and said that he knew the history of the property and all. And it was a beautiful place, all wooded and pretty.
Yeah, it was interesting to see where Grandfather had a mill. Grandfather was driven out of Warwick by mobs, anti-Mormon, and drove him out. But it was interesting, in Warwick town, there was one street named Nauvoo, Alma.
There were church names on the streets.
Yeah, 4 streets there that were named after Mormon activities and people. So the history there, I guess later became more friendly to the church. So we enjoyed that visit.
So anyway, we got up to New Brunswick or along the coast, and they had a ferry we could have gone on, but we were overweight, were we?
Well, it would have cost us $1,600 to go across on the ferry. It would have saved us 2 days' time, but I couldn't see paying $1,600 to save 2 days, so we went on up through and into New Brunswick. We could have gone from Boston over to Halifax on the ferry, but we decided to be tourists, and we went on around up to the New Brunswick border and then down through New Brunswick. And it was interesting through there. There were little churches, a lot of them along through that country, beautiful little buildings. And the country is beautiful through there. It's wooded, and then lots of little farms and things, so we enjoyed the trip.
We forgot to mention that we did practice what we learned in the trailer camp in Provo. We did decide that we became friendly with the people camped next to us who were not members, and so we decided it was time to pass out our first Book of Mormon. And so I don't know, I think I lost the draw, because it turned out that I went to give them a Book of Mormon, then Gene followed, and we did a little missionary work in the trailer camp. So that was our first experience on the mission. And it was a good one. It was a good experience. They said they would read the Book of Mormon and keep in touch. So then we're up in New Brunswick, over into Nova Scotia and into Halifax, and the President Blake met us that evening. We parked our trailer in a campsite, met that evening, and he told us that the next day we have to leave to go to Newfoundland because they were holding a big branch meeting and they were going to welcome us to the island. So to get to the ferry, it was about, how long? drive?
Took about 10 hours to get from Halifax over to the Sydney, where they take the ferry from there out.
So we camped one night and then took off in the morning for the real site of our mission.
We got into Sydney about 7 o'clock at night, and the ferry didn't leave until 11 that night, so we sat in the trailer and the pickup and all waiting for it to go on. And the ferry was a lot bigger than I ever dreamed of a ferry being, because they went such a long distance. I counted on that ferry, on the upper level, I figured there was over 200 cars on there. And then the lower level had our trailer and 10, well, I don't know how many, 18-wheelers, but it was full of 18-wheelers because everything on that island comes from somewhere else. They don't raise but very little produce on the island, and they don't manufacture anything there other than paper, so everything has to come from the mainland. So the ferry is busy all the time. But we got on the ferry and we figured we couldn't get a cabin to sleep, so we had to sit up in the chairs to sleep. And we figured, well, they've got recliner chairs there, we'll do all right. So we got on and we sat down somewhere, and Ruth started to visit with a lady there. And anyway, she visited for a long time. When we went to find a chair, there was not one chair recliner there. The only chair we could find was in a kid's playroom, and it was a square, straight-backed, hard chair. So we didn't sleep that night. We sat in those hard chairs and then walked around and whatever we wanted to do, but it was a long night.
President Dunn, when we left our mission, told me that he felt moved by the Spirit to tell me that there was one particular woman on the island that I was sent to help. And I'm not sure that there was one in the end, but when I was on the ferry, I thought maybe this is the one, so I better talk to her. Well, she had just left her husband after his infidelity experience, and she said she was ready to drive her car into the ocean, but decided to take the ferry instead. And so she was really distraught and crying. So we spent most of the night talking. And after we got on the island, we did contact her several times, and also the elders went to see her. So, but as it turns out, when I got home, I thought of all the women that I thought might have been the one that President Dunn was talking about, and came to the conclusion that there were several ones that I did get close to and probably was able to help. So anyway, we were met by this group from the branch at Corner Brook. Well, first Jean has to tell you what the sign said. When we got off the ferry, there's a big sign to welcome you to Newfoundland.
Yeah, those people are so firm in their pride of their island. As we got off the ferry and went through the little town of where the ferry unloads, outside of town there was a huge sign like we have advertising signs here, and on that sign it said, in 1948, Canada joined Newfoundland in the Confederation. So it wasn't, they didn't join Canada, Canada joined them. And so their pride is firm.
So you get that first feeling of what is ahead when you realize that these people who have very little are still so prideful of their homeland and their way of life and the traditions of their fathers. I think of that so often when I read the Book of Mormon, and it warns us against staying on an unrighteous path by following the traditions of our fathers. There's a good tradition and a not so good tradition, I think, because these people, when we would visit them, one of the things we heard so often was, "I don't believe in a organized religion. My family did da-da-da, and that's good enough for me." So they did kind of hang on to their past life and didn't really want, quote unquote, an organized religion. So anyway, we got to Corner Brook and they had this little branch get together, always with food. Food attracted people to come to these meetings. So they would usually serve some kind of food, and this was kind of a barbecue meeting. We were first greeted by Lillian. What was her last name? Lillian.
I don't remember now.
Oh, and Randy. Anyway, Lillian was a long time going through and around and with missionaries, elders, a couple missionaries, and her first conversation with us was that she really knew that we were there to help her husband join the church. Well, that didn't happen before we left, but in the process we found that some of those wishes were really not sincere. But anyway, we met with this group from the branch, got a kind of leg up on the families and the people and the children, and then went on to Pasadena, where we set up camp. The host at the campground was very gracious and helped us in every way that he could, and we were right close to his house, and he had run a water line and looked forward to the winter when we would be snowed in and all that, and had preparation made for our trailer. So then we started the actual missionary experiences on that following Sunday. And go ahead.
The President Blake called me as second counselor to the branch president. So I had that responsibility. And he assigned me Deer Creek, or Deer Lake branch to be over. And so on a Sunday morning, we'd go to Corner Brook, to the meetings there for 3 hours. Then we would quickly drive over to Deer Lake and then conduct the meetings there. So it made a full day. But another thing that happened on Sunday, our missionaries, young missionaries there, would make an appointment with someone that they couldn't go to alone and have to include us. And so they'd make that appointment at 8 o'clock that night, because the time we got from Deer Lake, had our dinner and got to that 8 o'clock meeting, we had to hurry. Then they'd meet for 2 hours. They had to be home at 9 o'clock, So actually, we'd meet there for an hour, but it took us another hour to get home. So we'd be at about 10 o'clock at night, and we'd leave at 7 in the morning. So it made a full day on Sunday.
So Sunday was not actually a day of rest, but the whole experience, when I contemplated our individual experiences and how it was to be on a mission, for me, we totally dedicated our time and our talents and everything to the Lord on that trip, on that experience. And so just the experience of doing that has stayed with me for a long time, because everything is dependent on your dedication, and so the Spirit is there to guide you in everything you do. We would maybe make a plan for what we thought we were going to do the next day, but when you totally are dependent on the Spirit, it doesn't turn out at all like you thought it was going to, but how the Holy Spirit wanted it to turn out. So for me, that was a total, we didn't worry about home, we didn't worry about money, we didn't worry about food. It was just like we're totally at the Lord's will, and that's hard to do without that total dedication. So for me, that was an experience that made me understand that that is possible, to live like that, totally under the influence of the Spirit and not particularly what you have planned for the day. So one of our most memorable experiences, of course, was with Maisie and Norm, which many of you have met, so we don't need to go into that, I guess, totally, but it was total missionary success, I guess you could say, in that a situation that was not good to begin with ended up eternally great. So if we didn't go for anything else, that was well worth the dedication and the time and the part of our lives that we gave. The other great experience for me is Effie Quinton, and she turned out to be my very best friend, in a sense that we still stay connected and still feel that we have some kind of eternal perspective together. But her story was lengthy, and I don't know that you want to go into that one. But
I'll leave that up to you guys, whatever you'd like.
Well, I might just say a little bit about Effie. She had a mental problem because her husband died while she was away, and she felt very bad about that. And they actually had her in the psychiatric ward at the hospital. And the branch president asked Ruth to go visit her and see if she could be of help. So Ruth had already met her at the funeral, but anyway, Ruth went to the hospital, spent a lot of time with her there, and then spent a lot of time with her after she got out. And after we left the island and went to Prince Edward Island, she came and visited with us for a week and spent a week time with us. So it was a good experience for us.
as far as the people, I need to just make this comment because I feel so great a compassion for their situation. Newfoundland was comprised of people who fished, and they fished, that was their livelihood. They would, their families, their generations back were fishermen. And in the last probably decade, the big commercial fishing boats came from Norway, from Japan, from all the Scandinavian countries and England, and they had processing boats that would catch the fish, process it on board, and then take it back to their countries. And they completely ridded that ocean around Newfoundland of cod, which was their mainstay as far as financial aid. But still, the fishermen were always the hardworking, downtrodden people, because they took their fish to a quote-unquote company store, and he would give them food and clothing in exchange, but always kept them in debt. So they always owed him some more fish. They never quite ever caught up, but they worked hard, and that was their livelihood. So they had to do it. That's all they knew. They didn't go to schools past maybe 6th or 7th grade. Canada was then, they're on the socialistic system, but they didn't, Newfoundland was at the tail end. They often referred to them as the same status as the Polish people here in the United States. So anyway, with the fishing gone, there was nothing for these people to do, and no industry. There's a pulp mill in Corner Brook that makes newsprint paper, and if you worked at the mill, you had maybe a home and maybe enough to eat and sometimes a car. But that was a family situation, so if your father worked there, you got a job there. That was the only way. So it came down so that there were a few families who had homes, a few families who had cars, and of course a couple of those people with cars also worked for the government. So other than that, the majority of the people on the island were always hungry, always looking, where is their next wood going to come from to keep warm? Where is their next food coming from? So if the church had a supper, everyone would come. This one man, Norm, would work on his wood all year. And then I thought, well, maybe in May it's starting to get warm and he won't need to have to go out and get the wood. And he kept going, and I said, Norm, why are you still gathering wood? He said, I'm getting it ready for the next winter. So it was total hardship for these people. And when you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and know that food and clothing and warmth are the basic needs, it sometimes was hard to get past that to preach the gospel. And so we did take care of a lot of food needs. We took care of a lot of transportation needs. We tried to help them realize that helping each other was a gospel way. And the people with the money were not willing to help the people without. We found a great division in, we called them the haves and the have-nots. And so visiting teaching was hard because a lady with a car would not pick up someone without a car to go visiting teaching. And so we would very often provide transportation for these people and also food. And we had two great events that brought the public to know that all Mormons didn't have horns and weren't polygamous. And those two events were a talent night that the elders, with the elders' hard work and us, we gathered in people with talent that they needed to feel good about, and so that was a great success. President Blake came, the church was filled and with people who were not members to see that what kind of people we were. And then the other one was the Festival of Trees at Christmas, that again, with a lot of hard work and a lot of help, we put together this night of celebration and had trees that community businesses had decorated in our cultural hall, and had come and met, and the elders and we were always there working with them as they decorated their trees. And then the mayor came and presented a certificate for like the sweetest tree, the most homemade tree, and we gave each one a certificate of some sort for their tree and had a program. Then the idea was that we would take the decorated tree for them in the name of this company, or for example, there was a grocery store. We would take them to a family that didn't have a Christmas tree. And as it turned out, in a way that was a great success, in a way it was a disaster. We tried along the way to teach our people to work together and love one another. And the only decorated tree that didn't get delivered to a family in need was our branch tree, because they all wanted to take their own ornaments that we had made, that we all had got together and made. They all wanted to take their own ornaments, so the tree was stripped and there was nothing left to give. But as the elders and us took the tree around to families, we would carol and then bring the tree, and there were tears, and that was such a good experience to see these people who otherwise would not have a decorated Christmas tree, their gratitude and their expressions of love and kindness for what we had done. So we tried to spread the love of the gospel. We tried to be examples of how you can help those with less than you have, and it was very, very heart-rendingly memorable.
You're blinking.
Yeah.